Cool, hi. So, well, hopefully no one from M&S is here today. So I'm going to talk about Percy. And in the summer, I was talking to Ritesh and Nakul, and they asked me if I could tell them, or could tell you all a bit about the kind of experience we'd had with our migration to Percy. So I thought, yeah, brilliant. Actually, it's not a particularly good story. I'll tell it anyway, but TLDR, it was really easy. So I'll tell it in two parts, that kind of migration to Percy, but then actually look at how that migration was easier than we expected. So I'm Chris Miles. I'm head of platform engineering at Legal & General. I'm a tester of many years before that, and love talking about testing. So the migration to Percy. Before I talk about that kind of migration, I'll just talk a little bit about visual testing itself. Visual testing, it's something that we really love. It's been in our toolkit for many, many years, and we've had lots of different tools to help us do that. And it's definitely something that's kind of grown with us. If you don't do visual testing and you do web apps especially, then I'd question why. But no, it's fantastic because it really quickly gets you masses of test coverage with virtually no code. It's much quicker than even a low-code option. And I don't know, they say like a picture tells 1,000, or saves 1,000 words, and you could say that with something like a visual test, it saves 1,000 assertions. You just don't have to write any assertions. When we started using it, the kind of main use case for us used to be cross-browser and layout issues, CSS issues. You know, it was really easy to find those sort of problems that you just can't find with an assertion. No amount of automation is going to do that for you. And as a manual tester myself, you know, I know that sitting and going through every browser, even if I'm using, you know, BrowserStack Live or something, it is just a time suck. And the faster you go, the more and more time it sucks. So visual testing, super helpful. There's loads of tools that have done it in the past, and there's loads of tools that are doing it now. So why did we use Percy in particular? So that kind of migration to Percy happened for a number of reasons. We were coming up to an end of a long contract that we'd had with a previous supplier, and they were really holding us back, if I'm honest. The tool was brilliant, but the contract really wasn't. We didn't have the capacity that we needed in it, and it was just too expensive. So the company that I'm working at, Legal & General, like many others, is going through quite a transformation at the moment, and there's a big simplification program happening. So as someone who has to manage contracts, which isn't that exciting, this was an opportunity to see if we could consolidate those contracts. One of the great things about BrowserStack, as I'm sure you're aware, and as they're sort of aptly demonstrating today, is they've got a really full vision and a really full platform. So this could make it really easy for us. The only problem was that because we were doing this for this big transformation, it was the first big piece that was happening, and it was getting a lot of interest. You know, we're like 11,000 people, something like that, and the board cared about this, which is very unusual. So it just couldn't go wrong. But we had about 6 months. It was going to be easy. So what we did, we ran some POVs. So really the answer that we hoped it was going to be was, oh, we'll just use Playwright's visual testing. Now it's got a really good visual testing capability. We thought this would be brilliant, it'll be free, I'll be a hero. And then we tried it, and it was brilliant until we had to manage our baselines. We run, you know, over 1 million visual tests every month, and managing those baselines and all those screenshots was just a nightmare. So we needed to use another tool, another platform. So I spoke to Krish, who's our account manager, and we set up this proof of concept, really proof of value. And it was really good. One of our engineers, Eleanor, she was working with one of BrowserStack's engineers, Hardik, and it was going okay. it wasn't perfect. There were things that were wrong. There was a big problem for us in that our previous tool had an idea of these kind of coded ignore regions. If you've ever done visual testing, ignoring things is quite a big helpful thing. Percy, he had to go in and draw around every single picture to show that region, and we were migrating hundreds of tests. That was a lot of work. So Eleanor, Hardik, they worked together, and BrowserStack very kindly ended up building in that capability for us. So if you're thinking of migrating over to something like Percy, you can thank us later. But no, it was super, super helpful. And Eleanor and Hardik, they were just working really nicely together. So all good. We're going to go for Percy. Now the easy bit. I talked to Krish. We got the commercials in place, and that was it. I've just got to pay for it now. And that's where it all went wrong. So if you've ever worked in these kind of big enterprise organizations, things can go really slowly. And in this case, I hit our procurement teams and our legal teams. But it's all right. I've still got a couple of months to go. It's going to be fine. Except it isn't. It's just not happening. Weeks and weeks and weeks go by, and I'm getting quite nervous by this point. And then we had 3 weeks left, and it just was fine. We just did the migration in the 3 weeks, and we were done. And that's why it's not a particularly interesting story. It was really, really easy. I mean, visual testing is just really easy anyway. There's an SDK to bring in and just a couple of lines of code, basically, that takes you through your sort of scripts anyway. So it had gone really well. And so, yeah, end of the story, really. So what I thought about instead was, why was it so easy? Because it wasn't easy, really. You know, yes, the technology is easy, but actually getting the work done, not so much. So this one, we'll talk about being intentional with our friends. So last year, as Mark said, I had the pleasure of talking here, and I was talking about using kind of simple childish language and how when we use that at work, it can reframe a lot of those complex problems that we have. And I often like talking about friends. And when I'm talking about friends, I'm taking it back to that kind of idea of networking. You know, it's connections, it's community, it's networks. And as a child, which again is where I nearly always end up, as a child, we naturally make those friendships. You just bump into people, you make those friends, and those relationships last. So I'm going to look at 3 different kind of opportunities of when I made some of those friends. So partners, groups, and some intention. So when I was at school, sometimes the teacher would ask me to work with the person next to me. I wouldn't necessarily know who they were, but I had a task to do. So in that case, you get to know one another, you get to build a relationship, and then you get the work done. And then this kind of idea of groups. When I went to school, I didn't get to choose which year I was in or which class I was in. That was done because of my age. It was done because of where I lived. There were reasons I got sorted into those different classes. And finally, intention. This is the one that stings the most. So as a child, I would just go and make those friends. It was really easy. Except, of course, that's not what happened. And, you know, as a parent myself now, I know what you're doing. My mum was making all these opportunities for me to meet other people. You know, she would take me to the park. I would be put into a club. There would be play dates. And actually, those friendships, whilst they were natural and they felt completely natural to me, they were actually curated at the same time. So why is that relevant to our migration? And it's really to do with change. When you have change to do, the easy bit is always the technology. It's the people that are the harder bit to change. So how can we use some of those ideas to kind of help us? So when I think about those partners, like I said, it's that kind of building those relationships. And so in this instance, we had Eleanor and Hardik, I mentioned them earlier, and they'd started working together, and they'd built this really good working relationship. They knew how to communicate, they knew how to talk to one another, they could get their work done together. So why did it help? Because now it was easy. We were in the we'd finished the POV, we had 3 weeks left, we had to do the migration. Of course, as soon as we started, we hit a repo and everything went wrong. So because we'd already spent all of that time invested in getting that relationship, it was really easy for them to resolve the problem. There was no sort of awkwardness, there was no ticket raising, they just slacked one another, and the job got done. It was massively easier. And I guess like that kind of teacher asking you to partner with someone, it was a relationship that we'd formed. They didn't do it through choice, they were just asked to work together. But having them work together on something that wasn't important meant that by the time they got to do the important thing, it was just easy. And so the next one is groups. Maybe this one's a bit more tenuous. But one of our engineers noticed that we had a lot of applications and teams that were effectively building parts of the same user journey. Again, we've got a lot of storied history and lots of reasons why things are like they are, and they're not necessarily making technological sense. So we recognized that there were lots of things that were the same, and so what Paul did was he built out a monorepo, a monopipeline, and effectively a front-end platform. And we pulled all of these applications into this single platform. And so why did that help? So when Eleanor came to make the changes, she made the changes, one engineer made those changes, and every team that was in there received the change. There was no real disruption. We didn't have to do any context switching. We didn't have to ask all the teams to make the change. It was just done for them. And all they had to do was a quick accept. So it made it really, really easy. And then the last one, this kind of intentional friendships. So this is this kind of idea that you're put into situations where you make friends. And one of the things that's super important to me and that we really concentrate on a lot is communities of practice, communities of interest, encouraging those relationships. So like I said, we're quite a large organization and we're very, very siloed. People are in different business units, they just don't talk to one another. So building these wide networks is really, really powerful because now we're getting all of those QAs or whatever the community's in, starting to talk to one another, and it's brilliant. You know, they're sharing ideas, they're sharing good practices, and most helpfully here, they made friendships. So why did that actually help me? So when it came to telling them about the changes that were coming, they already trusted us. So they knew that the work was going to be what we promised them. But like I said, there's lots of these different bits of organizations, and I'd got 3 weeks to get this through. And that was going to be really hard because there was an awful lot of business people that I was going to have to tell and persuade that honestly, that feature that they wanted wasn't that important, and they just need to get their visual tests through. You know, it would have taken me 3 weeks to get on the agenda, let alone 3 weeks to get the work on their backlogs. But actually, it was fine because we had these good, strong relationships with a lot of those testers on those teams, and we were able to tell them, you know, it's going to be fine. It's not a huge amount of work. You don't need to worry. And they understood. And that meant that they could take those requests and they could put it on their backlog themselves. You know, they prioritized it in their team, but we didn't have to go through that big, long, painful route of trying to persuade everyone who wouldn't understand what it was about, how to get something done. It just made it really easy. And so, just a conclusion, really. When we work with our friends, everything is just a little bit easier. And there's relationships that are always forming. And if you're intentional to create sort of situations around how those relationships form, they can help you get your work done more easily. And that really, or nearly, is the end. So just to introduce you to some of those pals, you know, I name-dropped a handful of folk there. So, you know, Nicole, Ritesh, Hardik, Krish, Eleanor, Paul, Martin. I even forgot to talk about Martin. I'll talk about him really quick, because this shows you how long ago 6 months was. when we came to implement those changes, Martin was using Copilot. It was like, oh, I'll just use Copilot. It'll be really easy. No one was using Copilot in our company, particularly at the time. And of course, he managed to get those changes done in just a couple of days. Now it feels really quaint to tell you that, because everyone uses Copilot all of the time for everything. So very different. A lot of those ideas, a lot of that thinking, it isn't my own. These are some of those kind of books that really helped me. And that really is me. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you so much. First of all, will you go back to the books? There was a lot of people pulling out their phones and didn't get there in time. So for anybody who wants to... okay, questions for Chris?
Hi, just quickly, just 2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
For image comparison stuff,
Yep.
you always have to have that initial screenshot
Yep.
to act as the baseline for future comparisons.
Yep.
Does Percy simplify that process? I'm thinking about if you was to give it an image for a given resolution, would it then generate other images for other resolutions?
I'm going to pass on that one ever so slightly. No, that's a cop-out. So you'll run the test the first time, and the number of the different resolutions or browsers or whatever is just something that you include in the Percy test in the UI effectively, or in there's just a file where you'll mention all the different browser and configurations that you want. So yes, then it will manage the creation of those first pictures. I didn't really talk about that much, actually, with visual testing. That's one of the things that's really different with visual testing over other kind of forms of automation, is that it breaks really, really easily. Because it's not got any specific assertions, absolutely anything will trigger it to break. And where these tools get interesting, and I'm super interested to see what the agents are going to start doing as well, because that sounds really cool. Where these tools are interesting is they're all about making it really easy to resolve something that's gone wrong. So it's not about having really robust tests. It's about having them fail really, really easily, and then very quickly be able to say, actually, no, it's fine, move on. So that initial baseline is the biggest pain. Once it's done, it's done.
Yeah, totally. We've got sort of workflows that render graphics to physical devices. Mm-hmm. Would Percy help with that, or is it just restricted to web views and stuff like that? Because it'd be important for us to be able to use Percy to check the output, for example, for a broadcast monitor.
So our use case is definitely just sort of web apps or mobile apps. But yeah, someone from BrowserStack will be able to tell you more, I guess.
So demo desk downstairs, ask a specific question and they'll just show it to you straight away. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Hi, Chris.
Hey.
So I'm from AXA Health. We've been on a very similar journey to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think visual testing is a huge opportunity for a lot of companies. So you didn't mention, we haven't gotten over the line, by the way, so we're still in the phase of convincing the business to spend the money. But you're beyond that point now. So what are the actual benefits you've been able to realise within the team, and how has that affected how the team work day to day?
So the biggest one probably was just taking away all of that manual cross-browser testing. We just overnight, it just goes.
So have you integrated with Automate so you can go across the different real devices?
So we haven't. We don't care that much about that many devices. That's not the kind of core challenge for us, really. But yes, you totally can. With a little bit more money, you get all of their devices.
Yeah. I've probably got loads of questions for you, so if you're around after this, it'd be great just to speak and go into a bit more detail, but thank you.
No worries.
Cool. Any more?
I want to talk about Pals, or ask about Pals. Teams change. How do you maintain that vibe of intention, partnership, and groups as your teams evolve and the business size changes from small to large, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, some of those books I was talking about, especially dynamic reteaming, is all about change in teams. And I think changes in teams actually make it easier to network, because you're now spreading those relationships to new teams. So actually, it's something I would encourage. But again, building those communities that aren't based on team. is also super powerful because now there's no badges, everyone's just there together. Yeah, and there's just no problems. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.